It's Mike Henry and Roger Corville with Here I Am. I believe we're live, so tell everyone hi, Roger.
Hey, everybody. Glad you are with us. And we got a couple nuggets in store for you today.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to today's conversation. It's we definitely have had our challenges this week. So all the cool stuff that I had created to begin this broadcast, I just didn't have the courage to try it out. We haven't tried it enough yet. So we'll come back with better production quality in subsequent weeks as well. Today, we're talking about the qualifications of how to, of saying, Here I am. What qualifications are required? We're using the first story of Jacob saying, Here I am, from Genesis 31. And Roger and I were talking about this. This is a complex background. So, Roger, would you share, just give people the 50,000 foot view to get them up to speed on where we are in the book of Genesis?
Yeah, Jacob plays so prominently in the book of Genesis. And just to set the table, right? Kind of like the scene, because Isaac and Jacob show up in chapter 25, which is quite literally half of Genesis. Jacob plays very prominently. And from chapters 25 to 36 starts with like the division between Jacob and Esau that even starts in the womb, right? And this totally messed up story about Isaac being a dodo head and
Yeah.
Rebecca's a liar and Jacob's a liar and Esau wants to kill his brother. And what just a mess of relentless enmity even begins in the womb and continues as they grow into adulthood, which will factor into how this story unfolds. And Jacob supplanting Esau as the rightful recipient of the firstborn birthright and blessing
Yes.
means that Jacob then flees to a distant land to live and work with a relative. And there he marries Rachel and Leah, bears the 12 sons that become the 12 tribes. And we see all of that play out in like chapters 36, 37, all the way through chapter 50, some pretty heavy stuff. But before the end of that division, and this comes a little after this little Here I Am narrative that we're going to zero in on today. But Jacob actually returns and God blesses him and meets him and blesses him and changes his name to Israel. So we're going to refer to him as Jacob, but Jacob/Israel is who we're talking about. But that's
Yes.
really important because the Lord reiterates the commission that surfaced in the very first chapter of the book of Genesis when he said, Be fruitful and multiply. And
Exactly.
he reiterates that command or that promise to Jacob, meaning that through his lineage, a nation and kings will come. And going back to Grandpa Abraham, God's purpose isn't just to make one family rich. The whole point is he wants to reach the whole world. And why did he choose one family to start through? I don't know, but when we get to heaven, we can figure that out.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, right, he even makes the same promise he gave to Adam. The challenge that he gave to Adam comes up again in all of this conversation as well.
Right.
But I'm struck because, one of the first things I notice is this particular Here I Am kind of happens in a dream, right? God's speaking to Jacob in a dream, and Jacob responds, Here I am. And we were talking earlier today with Chris Castro, who's also joined us in the chat, and she was talking about how there's a Hebrew word behind this. The whole Here I am is this submissive response saying, What do you want? Here I am. I'll do whatever you want, type of a thing. That's what Jacob's doing here, even in his dream. What do you think is the significance of that for the purposes of today?
Well, this will even get a little bit of a spoiler alert because then we're going to dive into some details. But you're right. There is something submissive, right? Something about trust that happens here. And you don't have to read very much. You can't read a paragraph of the whole Jacob story without going, this guy is still a liar. He's still got other gods and is letting his wife worship other gods, and they
Yeah.
sneak those out of Laban's tent. And, there's just this complete and utter dysfunction and mess that continues before and after that little Here I Am dream.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm amazed at how um, God works through us. I'm amazed at what he does in my life. Not, I don't need to judge Jacob. I'm my own worst enemy. So I see this and I go, oh, I, I don't get to exclude myself. I mean, I do believe there are things, and this may be something that we should talk about a little bit too. There are things that I can do to disqualify myself, though, as a follower of Jesus. Wouldn't you agree? Would you say there are things that I can do that kind of take me out of the loop when it comes to doing what God wants?
Yeah. Well, and theologians will disagree, but I don't, I think it's the majority, but probably, I'm just going to share with you where I land, which is in what they call the doctrine of eternal security, right? Meaning once saved,
Mm-hmm.
always saved. And we'll go more deeply into that, except to say that we very much can suppress the Holy Spirit's work in our lives, right? So it
Yeah.
makes it harder to hear him. And that language God gave them over, we see 3 times in the chapter, the first chapter of Romans, but we
Mm-hmm.
see it all throughout the Old Testament. God says, "Oh, really? You're intent on going down that path? I'll just
Yeah.
let you."
Yeah. No, I agree. I think there are times, right? There are dry places in our life that are part of what we're supposed to go through. And there are also dry places in our life that have some of our own doing involved in them because we're not listening to God or we're not doing what he says. I think about the verses, and I can't remember them offhand because I didn't make good notes, but the ones that say that if we're not faithful in little things, then how will we be trusted with more?
Yeah.
Right. And so we get challenged from time to time to pay attention to God in the way that we relate to our family members or the way that we relate to our coworkers. And if we blow off these promptings from God, after a while, we don't hear anything.
As I was doing a little poking for in prep for our time together today,
Uh-huh.
I found a quote from a pastor and theologian of the 1800s named J.R. Miller. And honestly, I don't know this guy, so I did a little digging. I'll spare you the backstory, but he said it this way: "Oftentimes, the reason we do not get guidance is because we are not willing to take God's way when we know it."
Yeah.
Which is to put an exclamation point behind exactly what you just said.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh God, really? Oh, that's what you want me to do?
Yeah. Another quote that I'm not prepared to talk about is, oftentimes we miss opportunity because it shows up in overalls and it looks like work. Right? We want God to just do it for us instead of showing us how to do it for ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think
Well,
sometimes
and
that's
back
it.
to that the trust of that "here I am" narrative
Mm-hmm.
and specifically the dream in chapter 31. And maybe I'll ask you the question like I'm interviewing you. But as you read through that, what do you see as the context of that dream? And why is that such a significant thing, not only maybe then and in that context, but then how that context may give us a principle that touches down for us?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. So, um, I, you know, I think there are people listening to this interview right now, and Chris has given us an answer too. We'll pull that up here in a second. I think there are people listening to us right now or listening to this recording who are challenged about whether or not to stay in a job they have, whether or not they need to leave a particular situation they're in. God's basically answering Jacob's question. I remember asking God to show me, should I go start a ministry or should I continue doing my job and things like that. Now, God didn't approach me in a dream. A couple of times I asked him these questions and then I got let go. and so and so here I am was more of a, oh great, here I am. It was but I think God's telling Jacob this is all part of the story. In Genesis 46, we see him getting called again, and he goes from the promised land to Egypt. This is 25 or 30 years later. And And I believe that God has it in Jacob's strategy because Jacob changes his name is changed to Israel. He is the nation, right? His 12 kids become the 12 tribes of Israel. God is moving his people where he wants them to be. And it's all part of the overall story. And so Jacob gets this call in the middle of the night, and it's clear enough that he knows he's supposed to do it. And I
Yeah.
believe that's, in a way, I believe God does that for us from time to time. There are times when he makes it clear. I was released from jobs. I was laid off 3 times and I was let go twice. And, it was not so as much as I was complaining about where I was or wanting God to be clear about it, my circumstances changed and the clarity was there. So I see that connection, at least for some of the people, hopefully some of the people that are listening. Let's see what Chris said here. So she said that God sees our heart despite our dysfunctional responses. Even with a mustard seed of faith, humility, surrender, he will fertilize it and transform us into who we are meant to be. So I agree. He's working his plan and our part of it happens, right?
Yeah. In that
Thanks,
central
Chris.
Here I Am story that happened in the dream, God says, I've seen what your uncle Laban has been doing to you. And we can get more into that story because, but the call ultimately was to return back to the native land where he had fled 20 years earlier when his brother wanted to kill him. Right.
Yes.
So he's going, it's not even just called to the unknown like Abraham was, like we talked about last week. In this case, he's called back to something he knows, which perhaps is more fearful, because he in fact, he would later on, when we see how he gets on his knees and grovels in front of his brother. It's really obvious that the nature that he is still expecting that his brother would hold a grudge, which rather ironically, well, not ironically, but was actually not unlike the culture, right? That whole bit of eye for an eye kind of justice of the ancient Near East was one of, you killed my brother, now I can kill your brother. Right. It's part of what God began to transform a little bit later in the Pentateuch, with like establishing cities of refuge where somebody who accidentally killed somebody could go get refuge until basically things could get sorted out in court. But at this point, because this is ish 1950, couple thousand years BC, not only was that retribution just a cultural reality among multiple nations, but as one commentator I read, I think this was Douglas Magnum, pointed out that the deception that looks really weird. I mean, everybody's lying to each other back and forth, right? Jacob lies to Laban, Laban lies to Jacob, Rachel lies to her uncle. That was actually a really prevalent motif. And it got me to thinking, actually, how that might touch down today, because a friend of mine lived for 6 years in Beijing, and she's just like, you just operate differently when you assume they're not telling you the truth, right? Caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. And you just learn to negotiate or engage with people differently. And I'm not suggesting we go immediately think everybody around us is a liar, but it does talk about a level of awareness that would have been part of that cultural setting that Jacob was in when he's like business dealings with his uncle Laban, and then heading back, even though it's been 20 years. Probably expecting that his brother's holding a grudge and probably still wants to kill him.
Yeah, well, he certainly behaves that way, right? He behaves like that's what he expects, correct? And, I think there's this kind of a undercurrent of distrust, and yet they're dependent upon each other for a very long time. And Laban is kind of hostile with the way Jacob leaves. and there are definitely things that are going on there. But I'm struck by how God basically intervenes to say, "This is important enough. You have to get this, Jacob. Here I am. What do you want?" And then this command comes down. I think one of the things that we forget, we want the commands of God to be easy for us. We want them to be what we wanted. And often when he's calling our name and expecting a "here I am" response, the next thing that happens isn't something that we were looking for. Right? Jacob wasn't looking to go back to see Esau. He wasn't looking necessarily to go back to the promised land.
Right.
Abraham didn't know where he was going. We'll
Though God did tell him in Genesis 12 that, oh yeah, and by the way, your descendants are going to end up in Egypt for 400 years.
Yes.
Right. And somehow this is lost by the time we even get to the later part of the story, when Joseph is now, running Egypt, and Jacob doesn't want to, that's the last thing Jacob wants to do is go down to Egypt without even going, wait a minute. Didn't God tell my dad or grandpa?
Yeah. Well, so let's make some application. We're not terribly far into this, but let's start making some application. What can we expect when we start volunteering "here I am"? That's one of the things we suggest in Follower of One, is that we begin each day with, "Okay, Jesus, here I am. What do you want me to do today?" What kinds of things do you think we can expect?
The text doesn't say this explicitly, but when it says in 31:11, in that dream, the angel of God said to me, Jacob, and I said, here I am. And he said, look, and I'm paraphrasing, I've seen all that Laban has been doing to you. I'm the God of Bethel, which is the little place where he had the little Jacob's ladder thing incident. And you made a solemn vow to me, get up, leave this land, and return to your native land. So the context of this particular little "here I am" actually kind of refers to this business story that immediately precedes that in chapter 30. And I'm going to just make 2 points, and then I'm going to kick the football over to your side of the field.
Okay.
Right? Remember that Jacob wants his wives and to bail out and to split the business, so to speak, because Laban didn't have money and Jacob made him rich, right? And so he doesn't want Jacob to go. But Jacob actually proposes that he takes all the black and the spotted animals and, sheep and goats. And Laban readily agrees. And then Laban, meaning Jacob, gives him the better part of the business, right? It'd be like if you had 2 business divisions and I'm giving you the better part of the division. So I think at least one part of him knew that he could do something with the lesser part. I don't know if that was an act of trust, or he just knew that what he had up his sleeve was that he had figured out how to breed animals to get them to have spotted and black ones, which you see just a little bit later. But Laban still came back and cheated him. And so I think there was both a function of a mutuality, a function of trust in God, but also there was a function of knowing he was setting things up. He was cutting a good deal, right? And it was kind of like if you got a partner and he said, I will split deals, but then he takes, some part of the deal for himself. I don't know if that's a perfect analogy, but Jacob's response was one of actually, in a way, being generous, I think, based on trust.
Interesting.
Just a thought on, that's just me. So I think if there's something that, another potential application that comes out of that, it's this little passing reference where he actually asks his wives about it, who meaning he's asking his wives about their dad,
Uh-huh.
and his wives say, "Yeah, no, he's a he's been a poo-poo head to you."
Yeah.
So, so now, so they're like, okay, but I don't know. I thought, particularly giving the patriarchal nature of the culture, that he actually
Yeah.
apparently asked his wives about this.
Yeah. Well, and Rachel was the one who wanted to go. I mean, she kind of started it after Joseph was born, right? So
Yeah.
I agree. I worked in the family business for a while myself, and my father wasn't Laban by any means. I'm not making that suggestion. But those family relationships are challenging anyway. Here, I think Jacob did. I think there was a little bit of I can manage this deal going on with Laban, but I'm not enough of a biblical scholar to defend one way or the other the way I draw that conclusion just from reading the text. But but I believe what we learn is that none of us are perfect. We are confident of that. And so we see some of Jacob's mistakes. We see the situation that he's in with Laban. And but God has his plan. God's working his story. This is the guy that is the nation that he's chosen to represent him in the world and to be the door through which he enters the world and saves us. And
Yeah.
I'm just blown away at that whole thing. Just um, it's so easy for me to kind of give myself a pass because I didn't have a good day, or I just don't feel like doing the right thing today. And yet here God is taking these people and constructing his objectives in their lives. And I'm just kind of trying to take myself out of that. I think I've told you before, I always used to ask God to give me a day off. I didn't want to be conformed to the image of Jesus today. I would get angry and just say, "Look, I just want a day off. I just want to be a bum today." And, it'd be like me going, "Oh, Lord, I don't want to say here I am, you know? And, but I doesn't look like I can get disqualified if I trust Jesus in some regard and God has a plan for me, then I think he's going to work part of his plan. Do you see some of that in this ancient story too?
Yeah. Well, yes. And to me, it kind of actually ties back to like a theme of the whole Bible, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is, wait a minute, God wants to bless you, and you said, no, I want to do it in my own way.
Yeah.
and then God says, I'm going to bless you anyway for my name's sake. I'm not even doing it because you're so awesome. I'm doing it for me.
Yeah.
Right? And that whole covenantal um, promise, well, it's often called the cultural mandate, right? Going back to Genesis chapter
Yeah.
1, I think for verses 26 and 28, be fruitful and multiply.
Yeah.
Then later, God says to Jacob, I'm going to do this through you, right? And we even see that in the latter part of Leviticus, chapters 26
Mm-hmm.
and 27 are constructed like an ancient Near East covenant called a suzerain vassal covenant, which is the king and the subjects. And it's usually kind of this contract. Okay, I'm going to do this for you. And this is what you're going to do for me. And it's
Mm-hmm.
got all those blessings and cursings. But God says, wait a minute, I'm going to bless you and multiply you. And I think one of the things, I'll just talk about my own personal struggle. To me, I still come back to thinking I've got to do it in my own strength.
Yeah.
Right. And really, at the end of the day, sin is stupid. And it just means I'm trading the best that God has in mind for me for
Correct.
something that I decide is more interesting right now. Like, oh, like you just said, I want to take a day off. I want a free pass when somebody cuts me off on the freeway and I
Yeah.
tell them that they're number one.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, and God says, no, I want to bless you. And how many times through my own sin do I say, nah, I still want to do it my way?
Yep.
But
No,
we
I
see that
agree.
repeatedly, not only throughout the whole Bible, but particularly in the story of Jacob. And in fact, I think that's even the context, if I remember correctly, of the second time, the second here I am. Is it in chapter 46?
Yes.
Right. And God's going, wait a minute. No, wait a minute. Go to Egypt. Remember, I'm the God who takes care of business. Meaning, and I love this phrase. I don't remember if I shared this last week. I'll give credit to Lewis Smedes in a book on forgiveness, actually, but I think he was a prophet Fuller,
Mm-hmm.
but he calls it redemptive remembering. And he points out that in the Old Testament, when God says, I'm going to do this, he repeatedly goes back and says, look at all I've already done for you. I'm the
Yeah.
God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I'm the God that brought you out of slavery in Egypt. And the whole point is that we look back to remember that, wait a minute, this is the God that can deliver on those promises that are part of history that you and I haven't experienced yet.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really useful thing for us to kind of go back and go, oh, yeah, wait a minute. God said he was going to do it. Do I
Yeah.
actually trust that he's going to do it?
Yeah. That's a great reminder. I was noticing on here in the comments. I haven't brought in a lot of the comments. Hi Dale, thanks for joining us. I see your comments in here, and Chris has added a couple of other comments as well. Um, Thanks for being a part of the show. For people who are watching this, click the subscribe button and the notification button so that you get reminded when we're going live. Right now, we're going live on, as we record this, we're doing lives on Monday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern Time in the U.S. Um, but that may change. And this way, if you click the subscribe button on YouTube, or if you're even listening to this on a podcast listener or LinkedIn or Facebook, you can like our account, follow our page, and we will continue to notify you when we do more of these live discussions. Today I'm talking with Roger Corville, my friend, and we're talking about Here I Am. Our goal in Follower of One is to help all of us integrate our faith into our work full time. And we're using these ancient stories simply because they're true, but they also point out how easy it is for us to join the work of God. Here's this person, Jacob. He was called by God and he responded, Here I am. And God used him. And our challenge to us is to be quick to say, Here I am, God. Hey, put me in, coach. Let's try and get into God's game every day. So I wanted to ask you another question about this deal with Jacob. What other kinds of challenges can you pull out of this story, Roger, that might apply today for how we have to face the calling that God has for us? Anything else that you can think of from there that you want to talk about?
I'll say this. I want to be careful with this next comment because I think I think it's faithful, but this is not textual. I'm not exegeting. I'm not preaching the text right here. But when Jacob goes and talks to his wives, clearly does, and particularly Rachel goes, yeah, what share do I have with this guy, right? There is an element of community there, right? And when unless you just started going to church, you've probably figured out and heard your pastor say, or, hey, you need to get in a small group or something, because if you just kind of hang out and Satan's going to pick you off.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the primary ways that we were created, how we find our identity, how we actually discover, if we study the spiritual gifts, how we actually begin to discover the nature of how God has gifted us in a spiritual gifts sort of way, is in community. And so I'll just say that because to me, if there's two ways that touches down, that could be a community. Like I've got this same accountability partner that I've had for like 15 years.
Yeah.
And who knows my business, my story inside and out, including the not so pretty parts. But I think that's also, as we bring this back to our workplace, where it is really easy for us to feel alone,
Yeah.
right? Are there even any other believers? And even if so, what does it mean that God has said, hey, I want you to show up as my ambassador? And
Yeah.
I think if there's one thing that encourages me about the nature of follower of one, it's not even just participating in a couple week mission trip. It's community where you don't have to spend a huge amount of time there to get a sense of encouragement with other people who are on the same different mission as you. And I think that could be a really powerful takeaway, because that's where we overcome our lesser selves and are sometimes reminded of how God wants to bless us. And I don't know about you. In fact, you got more stories of community for the follower of one community than I do. But I think that's a really powerful part of saying, wait a minute, if I'm serious about showing up, if I, showing up, my ministry of showing up to work each day,
Hmm.
I think there's a powerful part of saying, how do I do that in community? Particularly if my pastor doesn't get it, or I don't know any other believers at work, or
Yeah.
I do, but we don't really get to sit around and do a Bible study at work or whatever. How do I nurture and protect my own heart? It means I'm ready to get on the ball field.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, Mike, because I know you've seen some great stories that have come out of people being in community with fellow brothers and sisters in Christ.
Yeah. Well, and Chris even commented too about iron sharpening iron. Part of the reason
Mm,
why we formed the Follower of One online community was so that we could find each other. Because some of us get in situations where there's not a church or there's not other believers around, and we need some help from time to time. But the other thing that I noticed, and I noticed from my own career, there were companies that I was a full member of. I worked for a lot of different people. There were places where I felt like I was a full member, and I brought a slightly different energy than those places where I felt like I was different than everybody else. And I believe God calls us, some of us, to be the full member. If you're in a job now and you're comfortable, you like that job, you're happy doing it, then I want to encourage you to invest in the lives of those people that you work with. If you're in a job and you feel uncomfortable and you feel like all those people are something else, start praying for those people, because God will give you guidance about whether or not those people become your real kind of work family. I remember one of the measures of employee engagement back when Marcus Buckingham wrote the book First Break All the Rules. One of the key surprises in that book was that engaged employees have a best friend at work. And they were very specific about that language, because if you don't have great friends in your workplace, it's hard to be engaged. But I believe that God sometimes calls us as believers to be that good friend in the workplace, not just look for one, right? And there were times when I was more energized to do that than others. But part of our calling is to be all in that work environment, and then watch what God does in the lives of the people when they realize that our real set of best friends aren't some group of people out at a church in the suburbs. Rather, our best group of friends are these people here at work, that they're one of us,
right.
type of thing. And
Yeah. When that person may or may not even be your best friend, right? I mean,
yeah,
just to be fair with that language, but at the same time, there isn't a one of us that couldn't say, how do I make somebody else glad that they showed up to work today?
yeah,
How do I make somebody else glad that I walked into the room? And I like the way John Maxwell talks about being a value creator, right? Are you
mm-hmm,
adding value to
correct.
others? And it doesn't mean you got to whip out Bible verses on people,
No,
right? Sometimes it can be the smallest thing that just is being intentional about being a blessing to others. It means you're on the ball field,
yes,
right? Most people aren't called to everybody's called to full-time ministry. Not everybody's called to be vocational ministry, as in, I got to be a missionary to Africa, or a church pastor. In
Yeah.
fact, no, most people aren't. But
No, I
we're all called
agree.
to say, hey, how do you just give a cup of cold water
Yeah.
to somebody who needs it today?
Yeah. I think that to me was the biggest eye-opening thing, was realizing that it's my job to search to search for ways to bless people. Um, we're getting a little note here. I just got a note from Dale saying that there's a delay on LinkedIn. So hopefully the people watching this on LinkedIn can keep up and there's not a bad mix up. Chris has left a bunch of comments. I'll share a couple of those as well. I think it is important that we're looking for our return to come from Christ, not from the people that we work with. That when we invest in the lives of the people that we work with, we're doing that as a believer, and our return comes from the Lord. It doesn't necessarily come from the people that we work with. And when we are willing to do that and able to do that, we experience a new level of relationship with Jesus and a relationship with our coworkers, because we become the giver. We become a person who is available to bless others and not always looking out for ourselves. Um, Chris actually has a story. She's one of the ones that she'll give away uh, Starbucks gift cards, or and we've had other people on the mission trips give away different things during the mission trips because we talk about that. Um, yeah, and Dale is reminding everyone this is also live on YouTube and Facebook. So if you're having trouble with LinkedIn, you can also find us on our Facebook page, on the Follower of One Facebook page, or on our YouTube page. But once again, the finding ways to give things away, I think it's an act of saying, no, I trust you, Jesus. This is not about me trying to see the return from the people that I'm giving things to. Instead, this is me trusting Jesus to make the reward. And then I just go ahead and do what he seems to be challenging me to do.
Yeah.
Right?
Your opening question was about, am I qualified?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most popular topics in Jesus stuff is, what is my calling, right? Well, I mean, that's popular outside of Bible stuff too. And as a guy that spent a lot of years trying to figure out where my calling was, something I studied a lot. Interestingly, there's different callings in the Bible, and I don't just mean occupationally, because in one sense, God doesn't care if you're a plumber or a software engineer. The question is, are you gonna show up? Are you going to say, here I am? The first of which is the calling on every human being on the planet to follow Jesus, who says, I came to seek and save the lost. But for those who say, okay, Jesus, yeah, I'm in, it doesn't stop, right? There is a call to be transformed, and there is a call to serve others. I like Ephesians 4. Paul says, I, therefore, a prisoner of the Lord. And Paul loved that language of slave, right? You're slave to your sin, or you're slave to Jesus, meaning I am a servant. The word is literally servant. But he says, I urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you've been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience. And then he says, bearing with one another in love. And that word bearing is literally like to put up with. Meaning, if there is a sense of what kind of work am I called to, Paul's not saying you should be a plumber or a software engineer. He's saying, yeah, you're gonna run into people who don't think like you, and they're not always so nice, and they're not always having a good day. And how are you gonna bear with one another in love, right? He also writes to the Romans, going, hey, I want to see you so that, and I love the mutuality of this, I want to very much see you so that I may impart to you my spiritual gift to strengthen you. And that is also to be encouraged by your spiritual gift, right? It's one of those great passages that talks about our spiritual gifts being for others. But unless you show up, others don't have a chance to use their spiritual gifts. And of course, in the workplace, they may or may not realize they have those. But I guess the question for you is, back to your point, Mike, about, am I qualified? Well, yes. Well, what qualifies you? Well, Jesus says, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. Well,
Yeah.
here you go.
Yeah.
Bear with one another and use your gifts for the benefit of others.
Yeah. Well, and that's just like many of the things that the world needs more of. We have an unlimited supply of them if we just will reach for it. So Dale made comments about joy. And two of the comments he made, one of them, he said that the Greek word for joy is basically translated glad to be with you. It's this excitement that we get from being with someone else. But for me, the the book Rare Leadership was very important. They talked about how our brains run on either fear or joy. Those are the two choices we have. And if we can use joy as the source of fuel for our energy in our brain, then we're free to give away happiness and joy and blessing and courage and smiles and encouragement and all these things that the world needs more of, trust and respect. Everybody wants to be trusted and they want to be respected. Well, it's always a reminder for me that I need to be shipping more trust and shipping more respect and shipping more joy
Yeah.
instead of whining to God and saying, I want a day off today.
Here's an analogy that I like. It's kind of like listening to a song on the radio and going, yeah, I like that song, or I don't like that song.
Mm-hmm.
But you could listen to that song and go, is there some part of it that I like? Yeah, I don't particularly care for that genre or that song or that. Oh, but that's a cool bass part. It makes me
Yeah.
think of a Tim Keller story. He told a story of like one of his very first pastorates. This is long before he planted Redeemer in New York City. And there was one of those guys in the church that he just did not groove with.
Yeah.
But he made the effort and intentionally reached out and did visitation. And this guy became one of his friends.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, I grew to like certain things about him.
Yeah.
And I then grew to like him as a person because I saw how God had wired him. It's kind of like going, I don't like that song, but I'm going to go figure out what something about that song that I like is. And I just liked that story. The nature of saying, oh, well, yeah, what if that person treats me like dirt. That person keeps trying to get in my business at work, but what is something about this person that I can like so I can bring Jesus to them and maybe even transform myself by realizing Jesus loves that person, even if I don't.
Yeah, it's what happens every time I pray for somebody, right? He changes me, he doesn't change them.
Exactly.
And Chris shared this thought I just put up on screen too. She's reading Andrew Murray's book Humility, which makes the point that we can't fully walk out what the Lord wants for us until we die to ourselves so that he can have everything to live out. Here I am. I think that's a great point. We get this focus on ourselves and our situation, and we lose the opportunities we have to be a change maker in the situations that we're in. And but yeah, I agree with you, Roger. It's exciting to be a part of following Jesus and knowing that there's always something for me to do. There's always something that I can do that can make a difference in someone else's life. And when I'm sane and I'm not totally self-absorbed or angry about something or irritated, then I can join God in that and experience his joy. And then if I get so absorbed in myself, I just take myself out. I think that's the place where I get disqualified. When I become so self-focused that I'm not willing to listen to God, I take myself out. That's the only condition I could think of when I was thinking about this talk is, I can play if I want, or I cannot play if I don't want. And that's on me, which is amazing because it fascinates me that God works it out that way, that it's on me.
Right. If there's one final tie-in I'll just throw out there with regard to Jacob and his little couple here I am things in the later instance, God says, I'm God, the God of your father. Don't be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you a great nation there, which of
Yeah.
course is just repeating what he said to Abraham, right? And I will bring you back. Joseph will close your eyes when you die. Well,
Yeah.
all of these, and we see that again repeated in Hebrews 11, in however messed up they were, at some level, they trusted
That's right.
God for something that wasn't delivered during their lifetimes.
Yeah.
And I think if there is something that I find encouraging, as much as we want this during our lifetimes,
Yeah.
God's timeline may not be our timeline. and
Yeah.
and the question is, are we really going to go, all right, if I don't understand it, I'm going to trust you. If I read this weird thing in the Old Testament that talks about killing people, I don't understand it, but I'm going to trust you. If I want this thing to happen in my business, in my life, with my family, I don't understand it. Oh, and by the way, God, it gets to be your timeline. Am I
Yeah.
going to trust you or not? That, I think, answers the question, am I qualified?
Well, that's a great, that maybe needs to be one of our topics. Um, we all have such a this side of heaven horizon, right? We don't think about the life that we're expected to live beyond this life.
Forever and ever, which
Exactly.
will make 100 years here kind of really tiny by comparison.
That's right. And the rewards that we will receive will never run out. And the things that, there are some fascinating promises to us on the other side of all this. And yet I have to almost beat myself up to remember to listen to God today.
Yeah.
And it's up to me.
And there is a now and not yet,
Mm-hmm.
right? God wants us to be part of of enacting the kingdom of heaven here and now, which was inaugurated with Jesus, right? That
Mm-hmm.
kingdom of heaven, so Jesus said, um, yes, it has come, meaning it's me. And it's now, but it's also not yet. I always, this for me was one of my most encouraging versions of that. In the book of Habakkuk, here comes Habakkuk, and in chapter 1, he's like, Lord, do you see these? Do you see the Assyrians? Look at, they're brutal. They're ugly. Look at what they're doing to people in Israel. And God says, Habakkuk 1:5, he says, look, wonder, and be amazed, because I'm doing a work in your day that you wouldn't believe if I told you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then he goes on and complains again.
Yeah.
And God says, but the righteous person will live by their
Faith.
faith, right? Which
Yep.
Paul, of course, repeats, as does the writer of Hebrews. And if I understand it correctly, what God actually said that he would do didn't happen for several decades after Habakkuk died. And yet he used the language, I'm doing this in your day.
Yes.
So if to me, if there's some part of that, here I am, and that trust, it's like, wait a minute. Am I going to actually look for what God is doing here in my day that may not unfold the way that I think it should unfold?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's a here and now, and it's a not yet.
Yeah. No, it's we have a good God, that's for sure. And I'm excited. I'm excited to join you and the people who are listening to this podcast and just chase him a little bit and see what he would have us do, because we experience joy when we do that. And we experience the joy of following him. It's been a great reminder to me. I told you before we started today, this hadn't been a good day. And we were struggling with technology and a lot of other things. But just taking this time to think about God and what he has called us to is an opportunity. I hope that our listeners are using some of their time and their mind cycles to think of those things as well. What's one last thing that you would pass along to the people watching this podcast or this video live stream to share about the whole point of Here I Am and how it ties back to this old story with Jacob?
Yeah. God said, I'm going to do this with you or without you,
Yeah.
but it'll go a whole lot easier with you. Dale on YouTube says that darn free will. Yeah, that's my problem. Right? That's the I want to be a problem with the living sacrifices. It keeps crawling back down off the altar. I'm so busted. But Chris says I'll let Chris answer that question. She says Paul could say prisoner with confidence since he was beat and sent to prison many times. And if there is maybe a way that I think I don't know about you, I find it encouraging that I haven't been beaten with a rod, lashed with 40 lashes minus one, or some of the stuff that many of the other people have gone through on behalf of the name of Jesus. You mentioned getting laid off. I had a friend of mine that happened to last year, was asked a question. She answered the question and then got fired as if she was proselytizing. And I don't know what to say. What I do know is that we serve a good God. And the question is, are we going to come back and go, God, I don't understand. Here I am.
Yeah. I'm reasonably confident that I will not be asking for an opportunity to question him when I get my chance. And Chris put up here, I just put this other note up here that she put, but do not overlook this one fact, beloved, that with the Lord, one day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day. 2 Peter 3:8. This is great stuff. And God's people are encouraging. Thinking about and talking about God is encouraging. Our goal is to challenge you, the listeners of this show and believers in the workplace. Let's let God, in our relationship with Him, invade our day. We want to challenge you in that regard. We hope that the content that we create and the things that we do help you. Roger and Dale and Chris and various other people are part of this online community called Follower of One, where we want to encourage you to practice your faith and to be intentional about living your faith on a daily basis. Don't miss a day because we miss out on the joy. And one of the ways we practice doing that is with the Marketplace Mission Trip. And Chris is reminding us, excuse me, Chris is reminding us anyone can do this. Let's join us. The next Marketplace Mission Trip begins September the 12th, but there's always another sign up for the next one. So if you listen to this after September the 12th of 2021, go to marketplacemissiontrip.com and sign up for the next one. You'll join our online community, go through this 2-week practice exercise where you start to bake this into your life and also become part of this online group of people who are trying to do this on a daily basis. We want to integrate our faith and work full time. And so I'm grateful to Roger and Chris and Dale and others, everyone in the Follower of One community, for being a part of this whole effort. Thank you very much. And thanks for listening to this live stream. We have had somebody come to our door here at our house, in case you're hearing all that. But thank you so much for being a part of this live stream and for taking part of integrating your faith into your work full time. Thanks very much.